Uli and I met at one of the JP Morgan events in January, and he asked me to do something really generic, which is just talk about healthcare trends in 2018. I'm a former consultant who used to work at Deloitte in Brussels for health economics and outcomes research. So whenever I don't know what to talk about, I go to a white paper. And so this is a PwC white paper. It's sitting on your table. I used Roche Genentech resources to print this out today. I hope you'll appreciate that. And so what I'm going to start out with is just talk about 11 trends generically going on in healthcare as an industry today. It won't be specific like some of the pitches today, which are actually more interesting than this. So there's three things that I'm going to talk about today, and I'll just address it. Is one, that PwC has a research institute called the Healthcare Research Institute. It's a bunch of physicians who got together, decided they want to contribute to consulting and educating people who read these white papers and be a little bit more accurate about it. So in this white paper, they decided to talk about three things. One is cross-sector collaboration, providers, payers, pharmacy PBMs, as well as pharmaceutical companies, the government included. A third one is strategic investments, and a second one is strategic investments, and a fourth one is how do we get better at creating efficiencies. So these are the three buckets that I'm going to address. The first one is this big thing. I was talking to Vic about it, called the opioid crisis. It's going on everywhere. It's not just in, strange places like Kentucky and West Virginia. It's actually going on here in 16th and Mission BART Station. Anybody that's been there knows what's going on there. So this is now, and the opioid overdose is now hitting people under the age of 50 as the biggest leading cause of death. This is really, really sad. The phenomena is so big that not pharmaceutical industries can't take it on. The physician can't alone address it. This is something that the players need to all get together, from the prescribers who are being told that they're being too heavy-handed when they give out pain medication, to the payers who need to talk about reimbursement, to maybe pharma coming back in and addressing the drug problem that they first maybe created. I do not represent Roche or Genentech in any of my talks here. I just want to be clear. So the second thing, and I'm going to move through this fast, is the social determinants coming to the forefront. What does this mean? This means that when we look at a patient, we just don't see diabetes or CHF or AIDS. We look at the person and say, what is it that's making them, that's creating the things that they're going through? How can we help them through this? So just looking at the patient's full profile, helping them get care, get to the hospital. I was at HIMSS in Vegas last week, and there was an Uber and Lyft representatives who are now creating Uber Lyft or Uber Ride for patients who want to get to the hospital but can't simply just use the app to call. They actually have a set time where they are taken exactly to the ER. They don't have to think about it, it's already programmed. So now Uber and Lyft is moving into the healthcare space as a services provider in a different way that we may not have thought about before. So just thinking beyond that. So the other thing that we constantly talk about is price transparency. So before, when we think about price transparency, we think federal government. We no longer are relying on them for a lot of things. Why would we rely on them for one of these, the big things? It's now coming to the state level. You may think of this in many ways as coming from the grassroots, going to the federal level. So this is now setting precedents for some things beginning at the state level, such as California, Maryland, Massachusetts, Florida are setting forth a lot of legislation that's moving forward, and then it's moving upwards rather than coming down. One of these things I was just trying to think of is California is actually leading in becoming, and has put forth something, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know why I'm looking at you, I feel like you'll know this, is that some of the strongest legislation around drug pricing and transparency is coming out of California. So when a drug manufacturer any pharmaceutical company comes forth and they're going to increase a price on their already established drug, they have to say what the price increase is and why they're doing it and is it necessary. And then they have to put that out into the forum for the public to scrutinize. So that's kind of a big deal because now they're not just sitting there, not being held accountable for this. There's other 30 states considering legislation like this to control drug prices. So now we move into strategic investments. Medicare Advantage, so there's Medicare, which is a government entity for people over 65. Medicare Advantage is a private insurance alternative to Medicare for people over 65. There's so far 20+ million lives here. From 2017 to 2018, there's a 5% increase in this. That just means people are getting older. That's all it means. PwC is very good with adding percentages to things, as are consulting firms. The opportunity here is that health insurance companies can now move in, help educate a consumer. A lot of elderly people, to the opposite of what we think, they actually go on the computer and they actually say, all right, how will I decide the next insurance that I'm going to move into as I get older? What they do is they go on the computer, they figure it out. So health insurance companies now have the option to also educate elderly patients and say, you know what, this is what your options are. You have diabetes, you have a certain disease area, I'm gonna do this and educate you, and then I'm also going to give you a customized plan for this. This works out really well, especially when you have a certain condition. Yeah, so, and of course, when you get to that part, then the federal government comes in and wants to make sure that things are regulated. So they are further being very carefully looking at these plans that are for senior citizens only. Let me know if I'm talking too fast. I'm just trying to move through my 15 minutes. Louder. Louder. Health reform isn't over. Yeah, it's getting more complicated. What's going on is just like at the state level and at the federal level, things are being approached from different parties in different ways. So one of the biggest things here is that I was reading somewhere that an employer now can go bypass an insurance company and go straight to a provider, to like a medical center, and say, okay, so before I had 100 employees, I would go to an insurance company and deal with your reimbursement system. But now I'm going to go straight to this medical center and say, can we cut a deal, or can we, how can we put kind of framework around how we're going to work together? This gives you a certain physicians who help your employees, but also it gives you a network that you're dealing with directly and you have more control over. So this is kind of, people call, or this article called it, innovation. I'll let you think about what that word means in this context. Securing the Internet of Things. This is something that we deal with every day. There's the cybersecurity issues. There's, this number is really large, 525% increase in medical device cybersecurity. When I read this, I asked myself, is it just because there's more reports, or is it actually happening? Is it more medical devices are now being used within the hospital setting as well as within, private providers? I don't have the answer. All I know is that's a really large number where there's things happening that we don't have control over.
What's a medical device? Like one of those cows or wild computers on wheels and someone is hacking it, or a blood pressure monitor? What's a device, medical device that's being hacked?
This is a really good question. I think if you look in your pamphlet or in your 52-page thing that I put on there on the 4th chapter, you'll probably find an answer. I didn't write the article, so I don't have a good definition, and I'm sorry about that. I'm happy to look it up afterwards with you. I have it too.
Cool.
Yeah. So the patient experience as a priority. I was thinking about last time when I went to Jamaica for one of my girlfriend's bachelorette parties, and we went into this all-inclusive resort. We were given like a mojito or something, and then some coffee and dinner. I thought about nothing except just hanging out with her and the friends I went to med school with. This is what the patient is now asking for. They don't want to think about how they get to the hospital. They don't want to think about the doctor and what's his name, what is he going to treat me with. I know how I feel. I feel awful. I want some help. I don't want to think about how my insurance company is going to bill me. I don't want to call them. This is what we're calling now the patient experience. So a lot of, trying to think. So a lot of providers as well as payers are now looking into this. They're actually forming departments where they are addressing the patient's experience and throwing money at this. So the patient comes to them. This is now differentiating companies from one that takes you from an end-to-end solution rather than you calling your prescriber, you calling CVS, you calling your payer, you calling a pharmaceutical company, all of these different things. You just get all in one. This is becoming the major driver because patients are the consumer. And then also, of course, CMS is putting forth incentives behind this where they have, they give you a little bit of reimbursement if your patients are engaged, and they can show this on a survey or a rating. The AI piece you guys talked about. Pharmaceutical companies are trying to figure out how to do this better. How can we integrate this into our, our patient selection, our adverse event reporting? There's a lot of people who work at companies like Roche that have a singular job of just handling the adverse events. This must be, I think, probably an uninteresting job, something that AI could probably do a little bit better, and then they can kind of watch over and make sure that things are going well in the initial parts of this integration. One of the other things about creating efficiencies would be PBMs and wholesalers being viewed as not adding value. So Amazon now has something like 12 different states they have pharmacy licenses. This is really interesting because this means that Amazon is now this big threat competitor who, as we already know, has an online retail service offering, and they're going to move into what, before there was some big deal that happened between Aetna and a few years ago. This is not considered innovation anymore. Amazon will do this. They'll do it for a cheaper price. This is what's going on. So now Amazon is taking the middleman out. They are becoming the middleman. They're making things cheaper, efficient, and faster. This is where patients will go to get their drugs once the physician writes the prescription. Yeah, that's all I want to say about that. Real-world evidence as a growing challenge for pharma. This has been going on for years. It will continue to go on. We're just trying to wonder how the FDA will regulate this. What will they ask for further after we provide them evidence from a randomized clinical trial? How will we use the evidence generated from just online patient interactions, them reporting it on Facebook, talking about the pain they're feeling? How can we take that information that we hear every day and put it in a framework that the FDA finds usable and they think is, well documented, and that it's not just like hearsay? This is the constant struggle that pharma has right now. And so you know about this already. There's the 21st Century Cures Act that's going to take effect. The FDA will review this, probably change their mind a few times, and then come back and tell pharma, like, this is how we want things to be done. And that'll change the way we are already making drugs, manufacturing them. The last thing, which I don't have a lot to say because this is kind of a generic topic, not just for the pharmaceutical industry, not just for healthcare, but with the corporate tax rate. Roche, I give the example of Roche because it's a multinational. It's a Swiss company, but they have a lot of employees in the United States. It used to be that you would go, I could have the option of going to Switzerland for 3 years, doing an international assignment, being paid in Swiss francs with a 10%, like paying the 10% income rate. That's no longer the case. I can now still work here and afford that. So these are things that are going on. That's my presentation. if you have any questions that I can try to address, please feel free. I was told that I have to repeat your question, so please don't mind that.
Yeah, all the three presenters today,
Mhm.
it appears that they use supervised learning model, training model.
Mhm.
And which is understandable because in medical field, you have to, there should be somebody who supervises the training model. But there is another way of training machine, which is called deep learning.
Mhm.
And in that one, I mean, it's a buzzword, it is going on in game industry a lot, I don't understand fully, but they say that it can give you a result which you will not expect, something. Do you see, I mean, I see data, it requires a lot of data, and you say data are crucial to AI success, this is what your paper says.
Mhm.
So do you see medical industry using deep learning as well?
So deep
In
learn.
future or someday?
I think it's already happening. I don't think it's in the future. I think
It's already
companies
happening?
like Roche are already starting to use it. Startups are talking about it now. So here's artificial intelligence. Here's deep learning. It's a subsect of artificial intelligence.
that's
It's probably the most interesting part
Yes.
of AI. How do they use it? So deep learning is supposed to be, and I'm not in technology, but I'll tell you what I understand is that it's the part where what you and I and how we process information, it takes it, it's like a child, it learns more, it's exposed to further stuff, it picks up, and then it starts doing things at the same level that we would, but more efficient and faster and better. And that's my understanding of deep learning.
that's right.
Is pharma using it? I can say yes. How they're using it, I mean, pharmaceutical companies are at the heart a manufacturer, but because they're a manufacturer who has to respond to regulations from a government agency like the FDA, they deal more with regulations as much as they do with manufacturing a drug. So then they could apply this in many ways, from the manufacturing site to clinical trials and how we bring patients in. How do we take that real world data that I was just talking about and apply it to putting a framework that we give back to the FDA for approval? So there's a lot of different ways that this could be attacked. I hope that answers part of your question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, yeah.
Question.
Mhm.
When they talk about value-based care and, pharma, obviously, to justify the cost of medicine, they have to show, at some point, they have to show the value.
Mhm.
Are there any examples of that happening right now? To say
In
that,
Roche?
hey, this costs $10,000, this drug, but see what it is saving. Are there any examples of that? Where pharma is forced to show the value?
I won't give you any drug examples. I'll just say that's definitely happening. When we think about value-based care, I see it, so why is this happening? Payers are saying, this drug a cancer drug should not cost this much. I know it doesn't cost this much for you to make it. I know that it costs something, but it doesn't cost this much. So how do we decide how much a drug should cost? Pharmaceutical companies are at the heart, they need the revenue to invest back into R&D. So they're trying to show value by saying that this adds a certain number of years to a patient's life, or in some cancers, just a certain number of months. Value-based care, in my understanding, is simply just showing that. But it's a hard question to answer in a generic sense, just because it's really dependent on the disease state itself. I can look up examples, and I can always come back, talk to you, or I can talk to the audience. But it's just about showing how you're making the patient better, but adding in cancer just a few more years. And so I don't have a really good answer.
And is that going to be the future.
It is the future. It's not
where
just,
you have to justify every drug.
we already are having to justify every single action we take. Why are things costing this much? Why are we only selling certain drugs in certain markets? If the US is the biggest revenue producer for us, why are we not taking these drugs and going to, I don't know, Latin America, where there's just as many patients suffering from this disease condition? Well, there's just not as much money there. But why are we making the choices that we are? This is along the same lines as drug pricing and transparency. We are asked constantly to be more transparent, not just from the FDA, but from government entities. So that's a really generic answer, but yeah. Yeah.
I have a question. I've had this question since I came to America, but it's interesting that the drug company is discussing patient experience as opposed to an insurance company.
Mm-hmm.
But I've lived in single-payer systems, which you know what you get. You pay a fee yearly, and then you know the rest is as expected.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I have to negotiate with 15 different parties if I want to know how much I'll end up paying. If I don't care how much I'll end up paying, then it's fine, because I'll go get the visit, and then I have to take the test to 20 different organizations, and then they send the bill to different processors, and then I get the drug from a different processor. At the end, I'll get one big bill.
Mm-hmm.
But if I want to actually calculate how much I'll will end up paying, then it's going to be a huge pain, because I have to contact each and every entity to figure out, okay, how much this will cost and how much this will affect the insurance company, which will end up paying, which is kind of reflective of what you're saying in terms of coding and whatnot. So I don't know how this is going to improve the patient experience, because generally speaking, the patient shouldn't really worry about those things. The patient should get the treatment and then end up paying one single amount.
So your question is, how will a private insurance system with a lot of different players be more efficient and improve the patient end-to-end experience? Is that right? Welcome to the United States, where private insurance supposedly has higher quality than a single-payer system. This is the idea behind it. So this report, a white paper, talks about trends. You guys as entrepreneurs are coming in, filling that gap. Hopefully in a few years, we'll be talking more about the efficiencies that were met. Yeah, it's a problem. So the patient experience, the patient wants this end-to-end solution. It's slowly getting there through all the things that are now being considered innovation. Everybody's working on it. Yeah.